Chapter 1 Evidence clearly seen of God within the Watchmaker argument. The journey begins by examining evidence clearly seen of God by presenting the Watchmaker's argument in Chapter 1 along with the contrasting Blind Watchmaker's argument by Richard Dawkins. This may be the only intelligent design book that deals with the Blind Watchmaker argument, as well as the Dover trial head-on. Along the way, the author engages ChatGPT with many profoundly probing questions and deep debates. The author focuses on the idea that the scientific method and empirical evidence can be used to make scientific predictions. This may be the only book on intelligent design, ID, that uses the scientific method to make testable and falsifiable scientific predictions. Chapter 1 of this book, Evidence Clearly Seen, covers several key topics related to the complexity of biological systems and the arguments for intelligent design, id. The chapter delves into the intricacies of cellular components and biological molecules, arguing that their complexity and specificity point towards a designed origin. Key points discussed include Watchmaker's argument. The chapter critiques the Watchmaker's argument, responding to Richard Dawkins's book, The Blind Watchmaker. It discusses concepts of intelligent design and irreducible complexity. The Watchmaker's argument and intelligent design, ID, are concepts that have been discussed in the context of the origins and complexity of life and the universe. Here's an introduction to both. Overview of the Watchmaker's argument 1. Historical background. The Watchmaker's argument, also known as the teleological argument, dates back to ancient philosophical discussions but was famously articulated by William Paley in his 1802 work, Natural Theology. 2. Basic premise. Paley's argument uses the analogy of finding a watch. He argues that if you found a watch in a field, you would naturally infer that it was made by an intelligent watchmaker due to its complexity and purposeful design. Similarly, Paley argued that the natural world, with its intricate structures and apparent design, must also have been created by an intelligent designer, whom he equates with God. 3. Key aspects. The argument focuses on the complexity and functionality of natural objects, suggesting that they show evidence of having been designed with a purpose, much like a watch is designed to tell time. 4. Criticism and evolution. The argument has been subject to criticism, especially after the development of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Critics argue that natural selection can explain the complexity and functionality of biological systems without invoking a supernatural designer. Watchmaker analogy. Wikipedia. The Watchmaker analogy was referenced in the 2005 Kitzmiller vs. Dover Area School District trial. Throughout the trial, Paley was mentioned several times. Reference number 21. The defense's expert witness John Hort noted that both intelligent design and the Watchmaker analogy are reformulations of the same theological argument. Reference number 22. On day 21 of the trial, Mr. Harvey walked Dr. Minich through a modernized version of Paley's argument, substituting a cell phone for the watch. Reference number 23. In his ruling, the judge stated that the use of the argument from design by intelligent design proponents is merely a restatement of the Reverend William Paley's argument applied at the cell level. Reference number 24, adding, Minich, Behe, and Paley reached the same conclusion, that complex organisms must have been designed using the same reasoning, except that Professors Behe and Minich refused to identify the designer, whereas Paley inferred from the presence of design that it was God. The judge ruled that such an inductive argument is not accepted as science because it is unfalsifiable. Reference number 25, unfalsifiable. That's not true. This is why I used the scientific method to develop dual, contrasting predictions that are falsifiable for both abiogenesis research, as well as for creation, intelligent design. That's what abiogenesis research is for. It can falsify intelligent design. However, no significant progress in the three most basic areas of abiogenesis has been made. It has been a perpetual, abysmal, confounding failure for the past 70 years since the Miller-Urey experiment of 1952. Amino acids found in life cannot be in random order as is found within meteorites, as well as within the Miller-Urey experiments. There is also what is known as the extremely important chirality conundrum of DNA and amino acids that has never been resolved. The Blind Watchmaker criticisms of the Watchmaker's argument. The Blind Watchmaker Wikipedia. The Blind Watchmaker, quote, Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design is a 1986 book by Richard Dawkins, in which the author presents an explanation of, and argument for, the theory of evolution by means of natural selection. He also presents arguments to refute certain criticisms made on his first book, The Selfish Gene. Both books espouse the gene-centric view of evolution. An unabridged audiobook edition was released in 2011, narrated by Richard Dawkins and Lalla Ward. Overview edit. In his choice of the title for this book, Dawkins refers to the watchmaker analogy made famous by William Paley in his 1802 book Natural Theology. Reference number 1, Paley, writing long before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, held that the complexity of living organisms was evidence of the existence of a divine creator by drawing a parallel with the way in which the existence of a watch compels belief in an intelligent watchmaker. Dawkins, in contrasting the differences between human design and its potential for planning with the workings of natural selection, therefore dubbed evolutionary processes as analogous to a blind watchmaker. To dispel the idea that complexity cannot arise without the intervention of a creator, Dawkins uses the example of the eye. Beginning with a simple organism, capable only of distinguishing between light and dark, in only the crudest fashion, he takes the reader through a series of minor modifications, which build in sophistication until we arrive at the elegant and complex mammalian eye. In making this journey, he points to several creatures whose various seeing apparatus are, whilst still useful, living examples of intermediate levels of complexity. In developing his argument that natural selection can explain the complex adaptations of organisms, Dawkins' first concern is to illustrate the difference between the potential for the development of complexity as a result of pure randomness, as opposed to that of randomness coupled with cumulative selection. He demonstrates this by the example of the weasel program. Dawkins then describes his experiences with a more sophisticated computer model of artificial selection implemented in a program also called the Blind Watchmaker, which was sold separately as a teaching aid. The program displayed a two-dimensional shape, a biomorph, made up of straight black lines, the length, position, and angle of which were defined by a simple set of rules and instructions, analogous to a genome. Adding new lines, or removing them, based on these rules offered a discrete set of possible new shapes, mutations, which were displayed on screen so that the user could choose between them. The chosen mutation would then be the basis for another generation of biomorph mutants to be chosen from, and so on. Thus, the user, by selection, could steer the evolution of biomorphs. This process often produced images which were reminiscent of real organisms, for instance beetles. Close quote. Response to Richard Dawkins' The Blind Watchmaker. Evolution says absolutely nothing about creation from scratch or the origin of life at a time when natural selection cannot be invoked. Therefore, in order to compare apples to apples, we must speak of abiogenesis versus creation rather than evolution, natural selection versus creation. Otherwise, we are essentially comparing creation against intelligent animal breeding where intelligent choices and design direction is being performed. A blind watchmaker cannot make a watch on the normal size scale, let alone the nanometer scale. Also, the required cogs and gears within the watch are not given as a starting point to the blind watchmaker. The same is true for the origin of DNA, RNA, as well as for functional proteins from scratch. This is why abiogenesis has been focusing on the RNA world hypothesis for decades to no avail. It takes advanced cognitive abilities, planning, purposeful design, accuracy, precision, and professional workmanship needed to overcome the surface tension of molten metal in order to form the uniform teeth of the cogs. References. Reference number 25. It is readily apparent to the court that the only attribute of design that biological systems appear to share with human artifacts is their complex appearance, i.e., if it looks complex or designed, it must have been designed. 23-73, Behe. This inference to design based upon the appearance of a purposeful arrangement of parts is a completely subjective proposition, determined in the eye of each beholder and her viewpoint concerning the complexity of a system. Ruling whether ID is science. If at least these three most basic issues of abiogenesis can be demonstrated, then ID would be falsified. 1. The chirality conundrum. Absolutely all living cells require exclusively right-handed sugars for DNA and RNA. Also, they require left-handed amino acids for functional proteins. It is easily shown that these cannot arise by chance processes without intelligent design at human level or higher cognitive abilities. 2. A functional protein from scratch. Functional proteins cannot be formed unless their chain sequences are precisely correct so that they can fold into very specific functional shapes, such as is required for the beta subunits of the cell's futuristic-like, high-efficiency power systems that are called ATP synthase. This is similar to how 3D printers make 3D parts, but this is at the molecular, nano-sized scale. 3. DNA code assembly instructions from scratch. Even after individual protein parts are made, they must be assembled at the direction of DNA code instructions, such as what is required to assemble ATP synthase power systems as shown here. Response to reference number 25 above. This inference to design based upon the appearance of a purposeful arrangement of parts is a completely subjective proposition, determined in the eye of each beholder and her viewpoint concerning the complexity of a system. Subjective. That's not true either. Various levels of complexity found within any mechanism can be tabulated, itemized and measured, just as the corresponding minimum cognitive abilities of the minds that are required to make them. That is always the case, and is easily seen when examining the complexity evidence found within DNA, RNA chiral purity, handedness, functional proteins from scratch, and DNA to protein part assembly instructions. The scientific theory of cognitive load, see Chapter 4 for more information on this subject, suggests that the complexity of a task affects the amount of cognitive resources required to complete it. According to this theory, as the complexity of a task increases, the cognitive load on the individual performing the task also increases, making it more difficult to complete the task successfully. This theory has been applied to various fields, including education, design, and engineering, to optimize the cognitive workload required to complete a task or solve a problem. Intelligence and design inference. The chapter examines what constitutes intelligence, how it can be scientifically measured, and how evidence for intelligent design can be evaluated. Intelligent design, ID, definition. Intelligent design is a more modern iteration of the Watchmaker's argument, emerging prominently in the late 20th century. It posits that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not an undirected process such as natural selection. Proponents and claims. Proponents of ID argue that some biological structures are too complex to have evolved entirely through naturalistic processes and must therefore be the product of an intelligent designer. This concept is often illustrated with examples like the bacterial flagellum or the human eye. Legal and educational debates. There have been significant legal and educational debates in the United States regarding the teaching of creation, ID in public schools, with critics arguing that it is an attempt to introduce religious ideas into science curricula as if creation cannot be introduced using the scientific method. Continued discussion. The discussion around ID continues in various public and philosophical arenas, often intersecting with discussions about the nature of science, religion, and education. Methodological naturalism also attempts to use naturalistic philosophy to exclude consideration of creation by ignoring complexity found within what was made and attempting to prematurely determine the nature of the creator as being supernatural, even though the complexity and information being examined cannot be defined as supernatural evidence. In summary, both the Watchmaker's argument and intelligent design are part of a long-standing discussion about the origins and complexity of life and the universe. They are often viewed through the lens of philosophical, theological, and scientific perspectives, each bringing different interpretations and criticisms. Teleology and intelligence definition. The chapter explores behavior, purpose, and teleology, including an interview with AI about these concepts. Understanding the meaning of intelligence involves a term from psychology called teleology that is taught in the following 1943 paper. Surprisingly, teleology involves something called negative feedback that is also used in many areas of science. Arturo Rosenbluth, Norbert Wiener, Julian Bigelow, Behavior, Purpose and Teleology, Philosophy of Science, Volume 10, Number 1, Jan. 1943, pp. 1824. The paper, Behavior, Purpose, and Teleology, by Arturo Rosenbluth, Norbert Wiener, and Julian Bigelow, provides a foundational perspective on behavior from a behavioristic viewpoint, emphasizing concepts like purposeful behavior and feedback mechanisms. It categorizes behaviors into various types, including predictive and non-predictive, and discusses these in the context of both living organisms and machines. To analyze, contrast, and compare the extrapolative behavior in torpedoes, missiles, cats, humans, and AI systems, we need to consider the concepts outlined in the paper. This is discussed and expanded upon in Chapter 4 as we look into how it applies to cognitive load theory, as well as within various other fields of science, including psychology, control systems design, robotics, artificial intelligence, and physics. What is intelligence? The meaning of the word intelligence includes critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, learning, and adaptation. Advanced design-level cognitive intelligence abilities in all of those areas above requires multiple levels of what is known as foresight, or also known as predictive behavior, to demonstrate abstract thought that distinguishes it from the capabilities of natural chance processes. Some of the key cognitive abilities involved include 1. Symbol representation and manipulation, the ability to represent concepts using symbols and manipulate them to convey meaning. 2. Logical reasoning, the ability to understand and apply logical principles and processes to solve problems. 3. Abstraction, the ability to understand and use abstract concepts and ideas. 4. Pattern recognition, the ability to identify and recognize patterns in data and use them to inform decision-making. 5. Metacognition, the ability to reflect on one's own thinking processes and make predictions about the outcomes of future events. 6. Systematic problem solving, the ability to apply systematic and structured approaches to solving complex problems. 7. Creativity and innovation, the ability to generate novel solutions and approaches to problems. These complex cognitive abilities, when combined, allow advanced design-level intelligence to engage in abstract thought. While natural chance processes may produce seemingly organized patterns, they do not possess the same level of intelligence, decision-making, and problem-solving abilities as advanced design intelligence. Advanced design intelligence's ability to demonstrate abstract thought and engage in higher-level reasoning, decision-making, and problem-solving sets it apart from the purely random processes of nature. Foresight, the ability to judge correctly what is going to happen in the future and plan your actions based on this knowledge. It involves extrapolation that requires a sandbox-style memory space to anticipate and imagine a future prediction of its environment and conditions based on previous conditions and trending patterns. It stays self-aware and evaluates its own position within its environment, measures its own strengths and weaknesses, and compares and contrasts its safety versus vulnerabilities. It also looks ahead at potential obstacles and attempts to recognize and evade adversaries. Cognitive abilities required to write DNA code from scratch. Designing and writing DNA code from scratch for gene expression is an interdisciplinary endeavor that blends principles from genetics, molecular biology, bioinformatics, and synthetic biology. This task requires a sophisticated understanding of how genes are regulated, expressed, and how they interact within the complex network of a cell. Achieving this goal necessitates a combination of cognitive abilities and technological resources. Cognitive abilities 1. Complex problem solving, understanding the multifaceted nature of gene expression, including transcriptional and translational regulation, post-translational modifications, and gene network interactions. 2. Critical thinking, evaluating existing genetic information, models, and theories to make informed decisions about designing functional genetic sequences. 3. Creativity and innovation, generating novel ideas for synthetic genes or genetic circuits that can perform desired functions within living systems. 4. Attention to detail, recognizing the importance of sequence specificity and the impact of even minor changes on gene function and overall cellular behavior. 5. Analytical skills, analyzing and interpreting complex biological data to guide the design and optimization of synthetic DNA sequences. Stephen C. Meyer's arguments. The chapter draws insights from Stephen C. Meyer's book, Return of the God Hypothesis, including points about the rise of modern science. Here are the top 5 points that Meyer makes about the rise of modern science in his book. 1. Science arose from a theistic worldview. Meyer argues that the rise of modern science was made possible by the Judeo-Christian worldview, which emphasized that the natural world was created by a rational God who established natural laws that could be discovered through empirical observation and experimentation. 2. Scientific progress was driven by the belief in a rational creator. According to Mayer, the belief in a rational creator provided the impetus for early scientists to seek to understand the order and design of the natural world. Scientists believed that by studying nature, they could come to a deeper understanding of God's handiwork and appreciate the wisdom of the Creator. 3. Theistic assumptions underlie key scientific concepts. Mayer asserts that key scientific concepts, such as the laws of nature, the orderliness of the universe, and the existence of objective truth, all rest on theistic assumptions. He argues that without theism, science would lack a coherent foundation. 4. Scientific discovery reinforced theism. Mayer claims that as scientists discovered more about the natural world, they found evidence of design and purpose, which reinforced the theistic worldview. He cites examples such as the fine-tuning of the universe, the complexity of biological systems, and the existence of consciousness as evidence for theism. 5. The conflict between science and religion is overstated. Finally, Mayer argues that the conflict between science and religion has been overstated. He asserts that many of the great scientists throughout history, such as Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler, were deeply religious and saw their scientific work as a way of understanding God's creation. He also claims that many of the supposed conflicts between science and religion were actually conflicts between competing scientific theories. Excerpts from his book Return of the God Hypothesis, Prologue, page 4 quote, "That science properly understood undermines belief in God." Other books by Victor Stenger, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Stephen Hawking, and Krauss himself followed suit. In 2014, the Fox and National Geographic television networks aired a revamped version of a famous 1980 series with physicist Carl Sagan, Cosmos, A Personal Voyage. The new series, Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, hosted by astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, began by replaying the audio of Sagan's memorable materialistic creed from the original series. The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. The new atheists and other science popularizers have explained the basis of their skepticism about the existence of God with admirable clarity. According to Dawkins and others, the evidence of design in living organisms long provided the best reason to believe in the existence of God, because it appealed to publicly accessible scientific evidence. But since Darwin, Dawkins insists, scientists have known that there is no evidence of actual design, only the illusion or appearance of design in life. According to Dawkins and many other neo-Darwinian biologists, the evolutionary mechanism of mutation and natural selection has the power to mimic a designing intelligence without itself being designed or guided in any way. And since random mutation and natural selection, what Dawkins calls the blind watchmaker mechanism, can explain away all appearances of design in life, it follows that belief in a designing intelligence at work in the history of life is completely unnecessary. Although Dawkins allows that it is still possible that a deity might exist, he insists there is absolutely no evidence for the existence of such a being, rendering belief in God effectively delusional. Popular TV figure Bill Nye, the science guy, has echoed this perspective. In his book Undeniable, Evolution and the Science of Creation, he says, perhaps there is intelligence in charge of the universe, but Darwin's theory shows no sign of it, and has no need of it. Consequently, as Dawkins concluded in an earlier work, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Another new atheist, philosopher Daniel Dennett, gives an evolutionary account of the origin of religious belief in his book Breaking the Spell, one that ultimately attributes belief in God to a cognitive impulse programmed into us by the evolutionary process rather than a rational or evidentially based system of belief. Thus, for those who know this, Return of the God Hypothesis, page 175 quote, "Not, and theoretically maximal reaction rates, such calculations have invariably underscored the implausibility of chance-based theories. These calculations have shown that the probability of obtaining functionally sequenced, information-rich biomacromolecules at random is, in the words of physicist Ilya Prigogine and his colleagues, vanishingly small, even on the scale of billions of years." In my book Signature in the Cell, one perform updated calculations of the probability of the origin of even a single functional protein or corresponding functional gene, the section of a DNA molecule that directs the synthesis of a particular protein, by chance alone. My calculations are based upon recent experiments in molecular biology establishing the extreme rarity of functional proteins in relation to the total number of possible arrangements of amino acids corresponding to a protein of a given length. Taking that and several other relevant independent factors into account, I show that the probability of producing even a single functional protein of modest length, 150 amino acids, by chance alone in a prebiotic environment stands at no better than a vanishingly small 1 chance in 10 to the power of 164, an inconceivably small probability. To put this number in perspective, recall that physicists estimate that there are only 10 to the power of 80 elementary particles in the entire universe. In signature, I also show that the probability of generating a single functional protein is extremely small in relation to all the opportunities for that event to occur since the beginning of time, what are called the probabilistic resources of the universe. Even if every event in the entire history of the universe, where an event is defined minimally as an interaction between elementary particles, were devoted to producing combinations of amino acids of a given length, an extravagantly generous assumption, the number of combinations thus produced would still represent only a tiny portion, less than 1 out of a trillion of the total number of possible amino acid combinations corresponding to functional protein, any functional protein of that given length. In short, it is extremely implausible to think that even a single protein would have arisen by chance on the early Earth, even taking into account the probabilistic resources of the entire universe over its 13.8 billion year history. And a single protein, keep in mind, does not a living cell, with its many hundreds of specialized proteins, make. For these and other reasons, serious origin of life researchers now consider chance an inadequate explanation for the origin of biological return of the God hypothesis, page 187 quote. Ironically, the generalization that intelligence is the only known cause of specified information, at least starting from a non-biological source, has received support from the specialized scientific discipline of origin of life research itself. During the last 70 years, every proposed materialistic model has failed to explain the origin of the functionally specified genetic information required to build a living cell. Moreover, origin of life simulation experiments only succeed in producing life-relevant chemistry or information-rich molecules in, for example, simulations of the RNA world as the result of the interventions of intelligent origin of life biochemists, or ribozyme engineers. Thus, intelligence or mind, or what philosophers call agent causation, now stands as the only known cause capable of generating large amounts of specified information, in particular, the amounts necessary to produce a new protein fold, the minimal unit of biological innovation. See Chapter 10. Scientists in many fields recognize the connection between intelligence and information and make inferences accordingly. Archaeologists assume that a scribe produced the inscriptions on the Rosetta Stone. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, presupposes that specified information embedded in electromagnetic signals coming from space would indicate an intelligent source. As yet, radio astronomers have not found any such information-bearing signals. But closer to home, molecular biologists have identified specified information-rich sequences and systems in the cell, suggesting, by the same logic, the past existence of an intelligent cause for those effects. Our uniform experience affirms that specified or functional information, whether inscribed in hieroglyphics, written in a book, encoded in a radio signal, or produced in an RNA world, ribozyme engineering, experiment, always arises from an intelligent source, from a mind, not a strictly material process. So the discovery of functional digital information in the DNA and RNA molecules in even the simplest living cells provides strong grounds for inferring that intelligence played a role in the origin of the information necessary to produce the first living organism. In my book Signature in the Cell, I develop this argument further and respond in detail to various objections to the case for intelligent design as sketched briefly in this chapter. I address the objections that intelligent design is religion, is not science, is not testable, is based on flawed analogical reasoning, is a fallacious argument from ignorance, and others. Close quote. Here are 5 of the top arguments presented by Stephen C. Meyer in his book, Return of the God Hypothesis. 1. The fine-tuning argument. Meyer argues that the laws and constants of the universe are finely tuned to a remarkable degree, making life possible, and that this fine-tuning is unlikely to have occurred by chance, and instead is best explained by the actions of an intelligent designer. 2. The origin of information argument. Meyer argues that information-rich systems, such as DNA, cannot be explained by purely naturalistic processes and that information always arises from an intelligent source. He asserts that the information-rich systems in living organisms are best explained by an intelligent designer. 3. The irreducible complexity argument. Mayer argues that many biological systems, such as the flagellum of a bacterium, are irreducibly complex, meaning that all the parts are necessary for the system to function, and that such systems cannot evolve through gradual, naturalistic processes and are best explained by intelligent design. 4. The challenge to the neo-Darwinian synthesis. Mayer argues that the neo-Darwinian synthesis, which combines the theory of evolution by natural selection with the theory of genetic inheritance, is inadequate to explain the origin of life and the development of complex biological systems. He asserts that intelligent design provides a more plausible explanation for these phenomena. 5. The inadequacy of materialistic explanations. Mayer argues that materialistic explanations, such as naturalism and atheism, are inadequate to explain the complexity and order found in the natural world, and that the best explanation is an intelligent designer. Critique of naturalistic explanations. The book is critical of naturalistic explanations for the origin of life, particularly abiogenesis. It argues that natural processes cannot account for the high level of complexity and precision found in biological systems. Summary overall, Chapter 1 presents a detailed case for intelligent design, focusing on the complexity and specificity of biological systems as evidence of a purposeful creator. It critiques naturalistic explanations for the origin of life and argues that scientific inquiry should be open to considering intelligent causes.